Recording now. So we're recording, and welcome everyone. So there's a few of you on here that I don't know, which is super exciting. Love meeting new people, especially in this context. I know that may sound weird because it's an emotional eating workshop, but it really is my passion. And just a little bit about me before we jump in. So I've been a mental health nurse for 12 years. And I went straight into mental health nursing from nursing school. Always kind of knew that it was my path. And then 2 years into my career, I started working exclusively with patients with eating disorders. So I still do that, just on Thursdays and Fridays though, because I'm also an Arbonne consultant as of 7 years ago. And that's also my passion. So I'm really combining my two passions with this workshop. And the reason for that is Arbonne has a nutrition program that a lot of you have been familiar with or maybe have even done before. And as an eating disorder nurse, I just didn't know how to wrap my head around that at first until I did it myself and I saw the value in it. And it may or may not be a fit for you personally. I'm actually not going to talk at all about that program, because if you're interested, you can reach out to your individual consultant. But I think the one thing with any meal plan or diet or whatever you want to call it, like lifestyle, the missing piece, if people find it hard to stick with, it's because of the underlying work that needs to be done, which is what we're going to do in this workshop. So hopefully that'll be refreshing for you guys, that we're really not going to talk too much about food. I know that seems weird. Anyways, you'll kind of understand more as I get into it. I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint here. So just give me 1 second. I have a hard time multitasking. Yeah, can you see this okay? Vicky, I can see you. Yeah, you're nodding your head. Okay. And you can hear me okay, you guys? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this has really been my passion. I thought Arbonne was going to be a vehicle to allow me to start a residential treatment center for eating disorders, which I still have an interest in for sure. But what I've realized is from working with patients with eating disorders for 10 years is that you don't have to have an eating disorder to have issues with food and to have a lot of pain around issues with eating. And I kind of thought, well, I want to do something to reach the general public and everyday women, just like me, who, may be moms, may not be moms, but are trying to hold down a job or not, just everyday women who are struggling, and there's literally no support available to them. So that was my reason for doing this. So I can only see a few of your faces now on the screen, but I'm going to use the few faces I can see as a gauge as I go on. But like I said, feel free to unmute at any point if you have any questions. Tonight, the teaching part's probably going to be about 20 minutes. And like I said, we'll open it up after that. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the 4 weeks before we jump fully into week 1. And week 1 is all about your thoughts and feelings about your eating. Week 2 will be how to manage urges to overeat, or if overeating is not an issue for you, just whatever way you're eating in a disordered way. So some people on here, that may not be their thing, but maybe you're restricting, or maybe there's something else that you're doing that you know is not completely normalized or that creates dysfunction in your life. So just kind of substitute that in when I talk about overeating. Week 3 is all about your body image and your relationship with your body. And then week 4, we wrap up and we share our experiences from the first 3 weeks. And that's usually a really powerful week as well, because we share some of the exercises that we do in week 3. And it's, I know people who have been through this program before. There's a couple people on this time that have been on before. I'm glad to see you back. For refresher, I encourage people to do this more than once. It was a really healing experience, I think, for people. A lot of emotion came out, and I think it was really cathartic and healing. So yeah. Just quick guidelines. These are pretty obvious, but I do have to say them. Confidentiality, obviously, you guys, what we say in this space has to stay in this space for people to feel comfortable to share. Active versus passive participation. So this is totally up to you. And I did mention in my little live video today, You can choose how much you want to participate here. If you want to sit back, have your camera off, and just listen, feel free. Like, come as you are. But if you have like instinct or you have a nudge to like put your hand up and ask a question, please do. Like, please don't let yourself talk yourself out of that. And that would be like participating more actively and having your camera on so like we could see you. I love when I can see people's faces because I can really gauge things. I can gauge the energy and stuff, but no pressure. Like, if that makes you feel uncomfortable, keep your camera off. No big deal. Focusing on emotions, like I said. So like, I'm not going to entertain specific questions about the Arbonne 30-day program or any other meal plan, really. Like, I'm really here to talk about the emotional piece behind the eating. So let's spend our time on that. And then showing up for yourself. So this is, again, like with the active participation, even when it's hard. So this is the thing. It's a 4-week workshop. It's 9 o'clock at night. And I know, like, 9 o'clock at night, the urge to watch Netflix or TV or whatever, like, to not like jump on something like this can be strong, especially after week 1. Like, week 1, it's pretty typical for people to be gung-ho and then to kind of lose steam. But I really encourage you, just when you have that urge to maybe, pass on week 2 or week 3 or whatever, fall off, just to show up, like, just even if you have your camera off, just to like show up for yourself. Because I think when people do that and they make that push, they get so much out of it, right? And it's those things that are easy to do and easy not to do that make a huge difference in our lives. And then this is the biggest thing, a no shame zone. And I don't think anybody on here is going to shame anybody else. I'm really talking about self-shame. And this is something, those of you who've been through this before, you might notice, like, I didn't have this on there before, but something that I noticed from the first 2 groups is we have a lot of self-shame. And I knew that, but how I found it coming out in the group was people were really judging themselves pretty harshly, like, even for like engaging in emotional eating. And I want to tell you, like, we all do it, right? So I think some people were coming into the group being like, I don't want to ever emotionally eat ever again in my life. Like, I'm so ashamed of the fact that I do this. And I just want to tell you, like, the reason why I say, like, shifting away from that self-judgment is going to be so powerful is staying in it doesn't help. It actually, like, feeds that cycle. So if you really truly do want to reduce your time eating emotionally, shame, there's no place for shame in there. Do you know what I mean? Shame just fuels emotional eating. So I had to put that out there. Like, whatever type of eating you're doing right now, if there's shame attached to it, the best thing you can do is move more towards owning it. And it's like, you know what? And your eating could be like the most effed up that you've ever seen. Like, it could be, like, there could be lots going on, but the best thing you could do is just say, you know what, this is how I'm eating right now, and I'm just gonna own it. And you don't have to like it, like, you don't have to fully accept it, but like, that's moving you out of shame. So that's my little thought on that. Okay, so let's get into it. So week 1 is all about noticing. And the goal here is not to change anything this week, but just to simply pay attention to your thoughts and feelings about your eating. So this is the other thing I've noticed is, like, we're in a hurry to want to shift things. And you may find yourself shifting in this week, but that isn't the goal. The goal is just to really sit back and observe. Unless you're doing a 30-day program, obviously things are shifting if you're a participant, but if you're not, then you don't need to put that pressure on yourself. Just really, like, take this time to observe and, like, sort of gather evidence for yourself on what your behavior patterns have been. Okay, so question for you guys, you can unmute yourselves. Have you ever been on a diet or a meal plan and not stuck with it? See Vicky laughing. Yeah, like, everybody's smiling, hands are going. I know this is like a silly question, like, obviously, right? This is all of us. Like, don't even have to ask it, but it makes you think, right? It's like, it's pretty universal that we've all been there. Okay, so how did you feel when you gave up on it? Anybody want to unmute or put in the chat.
You're hard on yourself.
Wendy, you said you're hard on yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure, right? Like it's not a good feeling when you like quit something, right? Some like chat's blowing up here. Let me just see what people like. A failure. Felt terrible. Felt like I failed. Yeah. So there's that shame. There's that guilt that I was talking about. And thing is, we don't just do this once, right? Like if you've done one diet, you've probably done 10. Do you know what I mean? Like that's what we do as women. Not worthy enough to stick with anything. Disappointment. Like this is like pretty significant feeling. Defeat again, right? So yeah, discouraged. Yeah. So it just, no wonder diets or meal plans or whatever start to be a trigger for these types of emotions, right? And probably for like complacency or feelings of like, why even bother? Like, why even try? Like, I'm just gonna fail. Do you know what I mean? So have you ever wondered why you couldn't stick with it? What was your like reason? Like what was your answer to yourself? What did you tell yourself?
Not enough will.
Not enough will. So Wendy told herself, I don't have the willpower. Okay. Anybody else? No self-control, no willpower. Okay. That I'm not disciplined enough. I'm just reading the chats that are popping up here. That I couldn't do it, that I wasn't worth it. Did any wonder that I'm anti-diet? That I'll start Monday. Yeah. How many of us have been there? We're like, yeah, like reset. Yeah, a million times. Yeah, it's tough, right? Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about in the workshop. Like why people struggle with diets, sticking to meal plans, sticking to anything that's hard. Like why do we have a hard time with that? Developing that self-discipline. And so developing this insight is not a little thing. It's absolutely everything. I'm still reading the chats. Vicky said she restarts all the time. So this is the secret to normalizing your eating habits, developing the insight about why it's hard to stick with a diet. It's also the secret to losing weight and keeping it off. So what is the secret? What's this big secret? The secret is you don't have a food problem. You actually have a pain problem. Some of you might be like, no, it's food. It's food. I'm here to tell you it's not the food. The food has just been a trigger that's been linked into the pain. And when I say pain, I mean an emotional pain problem. And you could see that, like when I put it out to you guys, like how did you feel when you put the diet down? And you're like, a failure, like I'm not worth it, like so ashamed, guilty, I'll try again, like disappointed in myself, discouraged. Those are all emotions, right? Like that's all emotional pain. And it's become linked in with the food. So then when you try to pick up that diet, that same diet again, it's like, oh, right? And so then we were like, okay, well, I'll try this diet, or I'll try this meal plan. And it's never the meal plan that is going to be the solution. It can feel like that sometimes because it's like it feels new and it's like we've got this fresh start and we're like, we don't have any baggage associated with this particular plan. So we're like all gung-ho for the first week or two, and then same thing happens. And it's because we haven't addressed the underlying emotional pain, and that's what we're going to do here. So also, just to point out, your degree of struggle with your eating is equal to, or at least proportionate with, your degree of unprocessed emotional pain. So the more emotional pain you have, the more effed up your eating is. I might start cursing in week 2 or 3, like once I know people are good to hear that. Yeah, so if you're like, oh my God, my eating's totally out of control right now, it's probably likely that you have a lot of emotional pain that's buried. Somebody just said, I'm gonna need weekly one-on-one sessions with you, Shan. I love one-on-one sessions, so I'm all for it. Yes. Does that make sense? Is this like resonating with you guys? For some of you, it may not be, and that's okay. If it's not, like, take what resonates and leave the rest. Honestly, like, but I know for a lot of you that I've talked to from the other weeks, it's like, oh my God, yes. So when you have emotional pain, it erodes your self-worth. So you can start, like, as a little kid, you could start with like, oh, like I have like high self-confidence and a high degree of self-worth. And then, you know, then all the body image stuff comes in and your self-worth just gets whittled away and whittled away. And your level of self-worth puts the ceiling on your life. So if you have had that stuck feeling and you're like, I can't get beyond it, this is why. As you heal your pain, you improve the quality of your life, and the ceiling on your life lifts. Your life becomes absolutely limitless. So that's what we're here to do. Huge. Yes, it's huge. Okay, so you may be wondering why you eat when you're sad and why you eat when you're happy and when you're angry and when you're grieving and everything in between, right? Like we just eat to cope, essentially. But how did you get to this point where like things are so tied into emotions? So let's start at the very beginning. So you are actually born perfect with the ability to nourish yourself. Unless, you know, something happened with your birth or you had like a genetic thing going on. Most babies are able to nourish themselves, and there's been studies where newborns have like wiggled from their mom's belly up to their breast for their first feeding. It's like super cool how that happens. And as a healthy baby, you were able to end the feed when you were satisfied. And anyone who's like a mom and like have fed a baby knows when the baby's like milk drunk, like they end the feed themselves, and they know when they're full. So why is this such a struggle as an adult? Well, what happens is somewhere along the way, food loses its neutrality. So newborn baby, food is food, right? But even in the first year, we start to attach emotions to food before we've developed other means of self-soothing, like a warm bottle or like a warm mother's breast is just soothing, and that's what the baby wants. So it becomes more than a source of fuel and energy. And it makes sense that the more uncomfortable our environment, the more we use food as comfort. So as we grow and as we go through childhood, you know, if we have distress or if we lose people or if we have abuse or neglect, like food is readily available to use as comfort. So it can start at a very young age. And all of us start to use food occasionally to self-soothe. And then what can happen is we progress to using food daily to numb that emotional pain because it's effective. It's a powerful numbing agent. And food is just one of the many options we have for numbing. So you may be on here and you may think like food's not my thing. Like I was telling people, like it could be overworking, it could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be gambling, it could be scrolling social media. Like some people are like that's all it is. Like if they're not at work, and they're not home sleeping, like all the hours in between are just scrolling. And that's just allowing them to numb out and distract from their own thoughts. Creating drama in a relationship is another one. So if you've ever like come home and like started an argument with your partner and you're like, I don't even know why I'm doing this. Like what? Like it's it's almost like it's like you're bored, or it's easier to focus on that drama and get wrapped up in that than to really like turn inward and deal with how upset you are. Like it's easier to project that upset onto that person, right? And it may not even be your partner, maybe sister, mother, like there's all kinds of targets we can have for that, right? The thing about food, though, is it's harder to reverse the use of it to numb because we need it several times a day to live. So all those other things I mentioned, we can put those down. We could actually like live the rest of our lives without those things. Drugs, alcohol, social media, like Netflix, like we can we can survive without Netflix. We actually can't survive without food. Like we need to be exposed to it. And to reverse a food addiction, we have to reverse the use of food as a numbing agent. So this is what has to happen. And how do you do that? We have to use our courage, choose to use our courage, and choose to face our painful emotions head on. And this is where people are like, I'm out. No, I'm just joking. There's honestly, guys, like there's not an easy answer. I say this on the next slide. This is simple. It's a simple answer, but it's not easy. Like choosing to feel your pain is not easy, but neither is suffering through the feeling of being out of control or like always overeating or like carrying extra weight that you don't want to carry. Like that's suffering. So instead of the suffering, you're choosing the acute pain, which is gonna you're gonna feel it, but it's not gonna last forever because you're actually gonna process it through, right? And so that sometimes that becomes like actually the more favorable option. I'm just reading the chats here too. Yeah. Okay, so the longer we have numbed pain, the more acute it feels when we face it. And I see this all the time in the eating disorder program. So it's an inpatient program. And a big part of my role is sitting with people as they have their meals. And so for them, it's not usually the overeating, it's restricting. But once they have the food, that's when their pain comes up. So it's kind of like the opposite problem, but it's the same feeling. And it takes a lot of courage to face it. And it feels very raw at first, but I always tell them you have to hurt before you heal. Like you can't go straight to the healing. Like you have to feel the hurt first. And that's what we're going to do here too. But our conditioning is feel pain, numb with food. So you have to be aware of that, right? And that's why we're going to notice in week 1, like our urge is no, like I want to eat more. Like I don't actually want to just feel it, but we're going to have strategies for how to feel it and what to do instead of going for those numbing foods. Okay, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit about food labels too. So obviously, like what makes this even more complex and more challenging is just society has bombarded us literally our whole lives with food labels, and we buy into this, right? So like how many of you classify foods into good or bad categories? That's good for me, that's bad for me. That's junk food, that's garbage. That's healthy, unhealthy. That's light, that's heavy, that's clean, that's dirty. That's whole food, like the whole food, that's toxic food, fattening, decadent, indulgent. You guys can think of other ones, but that's just something I'm really aware of in my own life is I don't put labels on food. Like, because it makes it, well, we'll talk about it on the next slide actually, what that actually does over time. And then there's the whole food paradigms like, oh, that's my guilty pleasure, or you are what you eat, or garbage in, garbage out. I heard that one a lot growing up, like you're going to turn into a garbage guts. I'm like, what does that even mean? Or like, don't ruin your appetite, clean your plate. Like how many of you were raised to clean your plate? Or how many of you were told there are starving children in the world? Like eat everything because people are starving in third world countries. Like that's what I was told. Yeah, Brooke's nodding. Yep. So what happens with all these labels, we start to think of the foods we eat as a reflection of who we are. Just think about it. Like if you're reaching for food, let's say you have 3 meals and 3 snacks a day. And so it's like 6 times a day that you're reaching for food. And every food item you go for, you're saying this is good or this is bad. Like that's just one day's worth of eating. Like you could have a few dozen times where you're telling yourself, I'm making a good choice or a bad choice. And what that links to is like, if I choose a good food, I'm being good. I'm a good person. Like, good job, Shannon, pat on the back. But if I choose a bad food, I'm being bad, or I'm a bad person. And we don't even we don't think consciously in the moment that I'm thinking I'm a good or bad person by doing it. That's the subconscious part. But that's the real slippery slope, because I did something bad part, that's guilt. We all know guilt and we deal with guilt, and that's one thing. But when guilt turns into shame, like that you're a bad person piece, that's shame. And that's, I don't know how I did that. I wrote on the thing. I honestly, there's a ghost down here. Shame is the number one emotion that eating disorders thrive on, or disordered eating in general thrive on. And it's because guilt makes you want to like do something to fix. Like, guilt is actually an activating emotion. We'll talk more about this in week 2. But shame makes you want to retreat and hide. So shame is like kind of like the dirty little secret. Like, you want to hide away from the world. So it just fuels disordered eating. You want to hide away, and then you like often want to like eat in private. That's where we start like eating when nobody's around, like those eating in our car, that sort of thing, in a shameful way. So before we know it, the whole range of human emotions is attached to food, from guilt and shame to joy and empowerment too. So there is the flip side, like there's the whole range. But we're making food that trigger for how we feel about ourselves. And I've seen people do that, like even with the Arbonne 30-day program. It's like, oh, I'm doing so good. And then it's like, oh, I cheated, or I'm cheating now. I'm like, stop telling yourself you're cheating. You're not cheating. You're just like not eating according to the plan today. Like, but don't call yourself a cheat. Like, do you know what I mean? I used to cringe. I'd be like, don't talk about yourself like that, right? Because you think it doesn't affect you. It actually does. Like, it does whittle away at your self-worth. So one thing to think about this week is, do you have any food rules, and what are they? So when we talk about the labels, like what foods do you have in your good category, your bad, your health, like what are your rules for eating? Are there foods that you totally avoid, and why, right? Like I've talked to people who have said like, oh, I used to love spaghetti and meatballs as a kid. And I'm like, oh, when was the last time you had it? And they're like, as a kid. And they're like 35 years old. I'm like, why haven't you had it? And it's like some messed up food rule that like, or somebody said something about pasta like 20 years ago, and they've like bought into it and like won't touch it now. And I'm like, but you love it. Like, and they're like, yeah, I do. I'm like, oh my God. Right. So speaking of that, this is the last thing I'm going to leave you with before we open it up for the discussion. And that's the 4 types of eating. So I actually find this really helpful. I heard this a few months ago. And I know what people have been in this workshop have found it helpful since too. So this is something to be aware of the next week too, and start to pay attention to. And we all do all 4 types. Like there's very few people who wouldn't fall into a category. Like it's very normal to like have all these types of eating. It's just the ratios that you have that we're going to start to pay attention to. So number 1, fuel eating. This is like literally eating to fuel your body. So like if you have oatmeal for breakfast, you may not like this is an example, like you may not love oatmeal and be like, oh my God, like I love my oatmeal. You may choose that oatmeal because you're like, it's a good way to start the day. Or maybe it's like an Arbonne protein shake and you're like, yeah, like some of us really look forward to it too. But there could be certain foods that, or like a salad that you're like, no, this is good for my body. I'm eating this for fuel. It could be, I don't know what, like could be pasta free, like it could be whatever. Like I'm not, like you have to know like that for yourself. But then when you were thinking of eating as fuel, consider like how often you're eating. Like, are you eating every 3 or 4 hours? Can your body rely on you to feed it every 3 or 4 hours? Or are you going longer stretches? Is there a reason you're going longer stretches? For some people that can work and that feels good. For other people, it's like just a habit. And they don't even really realize, or like they're too busy or whatever, right? And that's something just to look at. But just as that baby needs like mom or dad to feed it every 3 or 4 hours. So do our bodies. Like our bodies look to us. And when we don't, our bodies start to not trust us to fuel them consistently. So then their metabolism slows, and that's why people hit weight plateaus and all sorts of crazy things happen. So that's another thing I'm really big on, is like not being restrictive, like not going hungry on the 30-day program, because it doesn't serve you physically or emotionally. Second type of eating is joy eating. So this is like your comfort food. So what are those things that you love? Like I mentioned, spaghetti and meatballs for one girl, like could be like joyful eating. For you, it could be like Thanksgiving dinner, like you really look forward to that. Or maybe like when you were a kid, you had like a birthday meal that you requested, or maybe you have a certain type of food, you love sushi, you love Italian, I don't know, like, but it's really truly joyful. You look forward to it, you enjoy it. Just gonna check the chat because it's blowing up. Ice cream makes me so happy. I love it. People are like cake, pasta. Yeah, all good things, right? Comfort foods for sure. So the third category, and this is, I'll never mind, I'll go back to that. Third category is fog eating. So fog eating is like type of eating we do kind of sitting, watching TV, where like, let's say we're eating a bag of chips and we don't know how we got to the bottom of the bag of chips. Like, how did we get here? It's like lost track of time. Like it could be like what you do when you're bored. So that can be fog eating. You're kind of dissociated from the actual eating. You're just kind of doing it because you have nothing better to do maybe. Or it could be like you had a hard day and you're just kind of numbing out and you're just like, oh, I just want to focus on the taste of this food rather than the shit I had to deal with today. Like, right? And then storm eating is like an amped up version of fog eating, which is not just for boredom, but it's really like, I don't want to think about, I don't want to feel, I just want to like get this food in my face. It feels chaotic. It could be a binge, like in terms of quantity. It could be certain types of foods that you always go to. It probably is bigger quantities, like you're not satisfied with like one bowl of ice cream, like you need the whole tub, right? And then, so that's storm eating, like but the main thing is it kind of feels out of control. And the thing, so we're gonna like pay attention this week to what categories you fall into and like how often. But the thing to point out is like type 1 and type 2, like, so type 1 and type 2 is you're eating to fuel your body, you're eating because it's joyful. So food is the answer there, right? You're hungry, you eat. You want to go out for a social meal, so food is appropriate in that case. 3 and 4, so if you're bored or if you're numbing emotions, you had a hard day, food actually isn't the answer there. That's actually pain. Like you're lonely, you're bored, you're angry, like you're in some kind of emotional pain in category 3 and 4. So food actually isn't the answer there. So that's how to kind of like differentiate the top 2 from the bottom 2. And like I said, we'll all have, like, we're humans, so we're always going to have like bits of fog eating and storm eating, but it's just paying attention to how much. Okay, so just a reminder, week 1, like going into this week, like I'm going to give you a little bit of homework, but just remember, it's just all about noticing. It's not about making like huge, big shifts or anything like that. But to pay attention, to really pay attention to your thoughts and feelings about your eating. And when you reach for foods, like what are your thoughts around that food that you're choosing? What are your feelings? What types of eating are you doing? How are you feeling leading into it? And the goal isn't to stop like, if you want to stop yourself, you're like, I'm about to go into fog eating or storm eating, and you're like, you know what, that doesn't feel good to me right now, or I don't want to do that right now, and you stop yourself, great. But but like, that's not the requirement here. Like, that's not what I'm saying you have to do right now. But when you do it, just own it. Just be like, okay, like, and just look at it from like a curious perspective. How interesting. I'm about to storm eat my way through this tub of ice cream or whatever, right? Like, it's not a shame. Like, it's not like, oh my God, like I'm storm eating, like no shame zone, right? It's just like, oh my gosh, this is how interesting. Curiosity. Okay, so that's homework. Start to notice your thoughts and feelings about your eating. Are you making your food choices out of love or out of fear? So when I say like this is a big thing too, right? With 30 days or any meal plan, this is why I want to do this workshop, because I truly believe that the perspective that you go into the program with will really affect your results. So you can go into the 30-day program or any program with a thought of like, I want to feel better. Like I want more energy. I'm doing this for me, like from a place of self-love. You can also go into these programs from a place of self-hate or self-loathing. And it's like, this better be my last kick at the can. And just like a lot of expectation and like, do you know what I mean? So just really be mindful of that. And if you can shift more towards, no, I'm doing this for me, like I want to feel better, it's always going to end better and keep you on that program longer. Okay, so that's week 1 teaching part. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to stop the recording so we can chat.